If you talk to an average American who is seeing things that are like 10, 20% more expensive than they were before Joe Biden entered office, it's hard to have them say the economy's in good shape and give him high marks for that. So this certainly isn't helping anymore, and it gives Republicans fodder they need to attack Biden and say, look, your plan still isn't working. You can't even say inflation's going down now. It's actually going back up.
Right.
So it just adds the political maelstrom there.
Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle. I'm joined today by economics reporter Zach Halaschak. Zach, we've seen some discouraging, perhaps, news about inflation, which we thought we'd whipped, licked, whatever the proper verb is. But the latest numbers have not really been to the administration's liking, no?
No, it actually, the past 2 months, inflation has popped up. It declined to the lowest levels in June. Mm-hmm. And since then, July, it popped by a little bit. And then just now, the CPI, which is the main inflation reading, rose to 3.7%. And that's up from the low of 3% in June. A big driver of that has been gas prices. August gas prices were higher than expected, and that's kind of put upward pressure because gas is a big component of the CPI. But it's really not good news for the Biden administration, which has really been trying to market this Bidenomics push, emphasizing a year of declines in inflation, emphasizing the strong labor market. So you're not really seeing them out there talking too much about these duo of inflation reports that were out this week.
Yeah, because there's another thing that really tends to correspond a lot to the CPI and the inflation numbers, and that's in gas prices in particular, is Joe Biden's job approval ratings.
That's right, and it's directly reflected in his approval ratings right now. He's not been able to recoup some of the approval ratings he lost over the past couple of years, and he's still getting low marks on the economy, even though there are some bright spots like the labor market. But if you talk to an average American who is seeing things that are like 10, 20% more expensive than they were before Joe Biden entered office, it's hard to have them say the economy's in good shape and give him high marks for that. So this certainly isn't helping anymore, and it gives Republicans fodder they need to attack Biden and say, look, your plan still isn't working. You can't even say inflation's going down now. It's actually going back up.
Right.
So it just adds the political maelstrom there.
So one of those Republicans is former President Donald Trump, who's the current Republican frontrunner for 2024. And we've done a series here at the Washington Examiner on Trumpism 2.0, where we've looked a little bit into the policies and economic plans and so forth that former President Trump actually has. You've written about this. Talk a little bit about what a second-term Trump agenda might look like.
Yeah, my colleague Joe Lawler and I did a deep dive into what his agenda would look like for 2024. And it's a bit different from what we saw in 2016 when former President Trump really ran on the border and about building the wall, the refrain you heard at every single rally over and over. Now it's a big focus on kind of U.S. protectionism, putting up these trade barriers, building back U.S. manufacturing jobs through aggressive trade policies and essentially what would amount to a trade war. And then also another aspect of it is going against crime really hard, coming down a full-on assault on crime, executing human traffickers at the border, military operations perhaps in Mexico, naval blockades to stop the flow of drugs into the country. So it's very different than what we saw back in 2016 right now.
So you've also spoken to one of Trump's rivals for the 2024 Republican nomination, Senator Tim Scott. He's rolled out an economic plan. What can you tell us about what's in it?
Yeah, it's definitely a bit different than former President Trump's. One big difference in it, when I was speaking to Senator Scott about it, Trump has proposed 10% across the board tariffs, or has floated the idea at least, which would be it would be the biggest change in trade policy since the 1930s, really. And when I spoke to Senator Scott, he did not support that. And the biggest reason why is because it would increase prices for consumers. There's not much a president can do to control inflation independently, but a lot of the people I spoke with said that tariffs are one way that they can make inflation get worse. So Scott doesn't support that, but he does support targeted tariffs. So right now we have tariffs that were imposed by former President Trump during his first time in office that have been continued by President Biden against China. That's something Scott would support. So targeted tariffs, fine, but not the across the board 10% tariffs. Scott also supports moving China from the category, pushing the UN to move the category, or China from the category of developing nation, because when you're considered a developing nation in the international realm, groups like the World Trade Organization, the World Bank give you more leniency, flexibility to pay off loans. The World Bank actually gives out billions of dollars of loans to China that they wouldn't be getting if they weren't designated developing country. And obviously, China is the second largest economy in the world. And so Scott is saying that as president, he wants to push for that designation to be removed, which would make us more competitive with China on the global stage and therefore help American consumers and businesses.
So there has been a little bit of movement from the rest of the Republican field in Trump's direction on some of these things. So, trade and China were big Trump issues in 2016, and now some other candidates seem to be trying to get in on those areas.
Yeah, and I think that there's been a shift within the Republican Party as a whole. And this is something I've written about in the past. I spoke to former President Trump's trade advisor, Robert Lighthizer, and he said that basically the party itself has moved the Overton window when it comes to trade and comes to protectionism. It used to be Republican Party of Paul Ryan, just a few years ago, was fiscal conservatism, tax cuts, lower corporate tax rate, prioritizing, free trade, that sort of thing. Now it's kind of shifted away from that. You see the leading candidate, Trump, he's not even talking about reforms to Medicare or Social Security, and it's
criticizing other candidates who've done so in the past, in fact.
Absolutely, yeah. He's going after people for being too fiscally conservative, and he's now the front bearer of the party by a pretty wide margin. So that kind of says something about how far the party has shifted and kind of the vision that Trump has for the party and the country moving forward.
Well, we'll make sure your colleague Joe Lawler gets his share of the royalties of this video. Thank you, Zach.
Sure hope so.
You can read Zach and the rest of our policy team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.